We are here with, introduce yourself.
My name is Mark the Shark Shelton of Manilla Road.
Yes, and we are celebrating 40 years of Manilla Road.
40 years we started.
How did you get involved in music to begin with?
Well, my mother was a music professor and a music teacher, so that was pretty much a given thing with me. You know, my mom started me on piano when I was like 4 years old. So, you know, it was like bred into me from the get-go, and that's pretty much how I got started on music. I think the thing that really got me headed towards heavy music was, I think I was in junior high school when I went and saw Black Sabbath as the first big concert I'd ever seen on their Paranoid tour. I stood right in front of Tony Iommi all night going, yeah, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to do. Mm-hmm. And so that was probably my initial initiation into heavy music, and from that point on it was just me striving to be a drummer and a guitarist.
How did you go about developing your style? Because you guitar playing is original, and then your vocal style is like another original thing. Yeah, well, I mean, it really puts you overboard.
I actually had a lot of vocal training when I was young, but I never really had any guitar training. I was well versed on music, on both bass and treble clef, could read and write music, and I could play a plethora of instruments, you know, but guitar, by the time I actually started playing guitar, I didn't actually take any lessons, and I just learned by watching other guitar players and then sitting around and figuring it out myself. And so because of that, because I'm sort of self-taught at guitar, even though I knew music, I mean, that made it easier to self-teach myself at guitar. But I started, you know, I'd make my chord voicings, my chord fingerings were not necessarily traditional because I wasn't learning it from a teacher. I was just learning what I felt comfortable with. And
perhaps that's your secret.
That's part of it. I made up some chords that I never found in the Mel Bay guitar books or anything like that. So there's a few chords I use, like I use a D augmented ninth that's pretty much every time I run into another guitar player, they're like, oh, what is that? And that and I stole little tricks from hundreds of other guitar players that I really loved, you know, like Michael Schenker, Jimi Hendrix, Tony Iommi, and the list goes on, Ole Roth, blah, blah, blah. And Alex Lifeson. God, I couldn't even list them all because I'd be here all day listing them. And between my own self-taught style and all of these other little tricks that I learned by watching other guitar players, I think that's what really made a unique style for myself.
How long before Manilla Road became a reality?
What do you mean exactly?
Like, how did you go about forming a band?
Oh, well, I had just gotten out of the Marine Corps, and I had gone back to Wichita after I'd spent some time in Albuquerque and run around the U.S. for a while. And I went back home, and I hooked up with Ben Munkers and Scott Park, and just happened to be needing a place to live, and Ben invited me to come and stay at his apartment. And the three of us decided that, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we, you know, Ben plays drums, or sort of, Scott was, yeah, I want to learn how to play bass, and I was like, well, I'm sort of a guitar player, we should try and do something. And next thing I knew, you know, we were jamming together and trying to come up with a name.
And what is the meaning of that name?
Oh, well, the truth is, you know, over the years, I've probably told a dozen stories, if not 100.
What's the favorite?
What the name means, but the real truth is the first drummer and I, Ben Munkers, and I were sitting at his kitchen table in that apartment that I was just talking about. We were watching Monty Python's Flying Circus on a little tiny black and white TV, drinking beer and smoking marijuana, and that's where we came up with the name, and I'm pretty sure it was a beer-induced, you know, thing, you know.
So that's the truth.
That's the truth. I think what we were thinking of was, you know, back in those days, some of our favorite bands had colors in their name, like Deep Purple, Frigid Pink, you know, Pink Floyd, Blue Cheer, blah, 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 Black Sabbath, Blue Oyster Cult. So that's probably where the Manilla came from. And I remember us actually saying, well, let's put an extra L in it so people won't think we're the Manilla Boys Choir, that we're talking about Manila in the Philippines. And also it makes it really easy to trademark the name that way. So that was part of that. And then the road was just simply, we wanted it to sound like we were going somewhere. So that's where the road came in. And this is two drunk, very high guys,
Trying to make sense.
trying to make sense of making up a name for a band. And, we thought about changing the name so many times, but nobody would ever let us do it. They said, no, you're Manilla Road. You got to keep that name. But so there really is no meaning. We eventually just sort of told everybody, well, we think it means the road of light. But
Hey,
so
if it guided you throughout 40 years, can't be so bad.
it has. And
Let's look at the records.
It's not so bad.
So show each album and say a few things about it, whatever you feel.
Well, the first one is Invasion. This was our first one. We recorded it in the winter of 1979 in Wichita, well, actually in Newton, Kansas, at what we called the Miller Cave, is Miller Recording Studios. And this was like, us not knowing at all what we were doing in the studio yet. And the studio was very young too, so we actually sort of, the studio and us grew up together learning how to do this. Because, we came from the middle of nowhere out in Kansas where the Pony Express was still running. And so this was a really special event for us because it's our first album. It was pretty much self-produced, and we pressed it ourselves. We created our own record label, Roadster Records, to put it out, and did all of our own distribution ourselves. And it was tough. It was hard getting things going, but the reason we did it ourselves was we sent demos to every record label in the world at that point. Nobody could care less. They didn't want us. And then our next one was Metal, and this would have been 1982, I believe. And in between times, we had shelved an album and done some other demos and stuff, which eventually came out as Mark of the Beast, and now is finally reissued again as under its original title, which is Dreams of Eshkadon. And
There we go. That's right.
Wearing that one. But this one here, we were starting to get a little heavier. We were still struggling in the studio trying to find a way to record the band and make it sound like we sounded to ourselves live. And we weren't quite there yet, but we did have, a couple of songs that have really stuck around off of this one. On Invasion, I'd say my favorite cut off of that is either Cat and Mouse or The Empire. And The Empire we still do every once in a while live. So off of Metal, Cage of Mirrors and Queen of the Black Coast were pretty much our big hits off of that. And that helped us get a contract with Mike Barney from Shrapnel Records, who put us on the U.S. Metal Volume 3 compilation album. And that's when I wrote a song specifically for that album, which was Flaming Metal Systems. And it did really well for us. It got us that break into the international metal scene that we really needed. And at the time, we were working on the Crystallogic album,
Which is next.
This one right here.
A big record, key record in many ways.
It's probably the most important record in Manilla Road history. Because,
This is where my history begins with the band. And
and it's sold better than any of our other albums because it's been out and been an iconic album release for us. And it's still, to this day, we have to play. We actually still have every single song off of this album in our live repertoire because we just can't get away without doing songs off of this album, and sometimes we have to do the whole album because it's so popular. But Mike Barney actually wanted to sign us for the next release, which would have been this one. Well, I already had this one in the can. I went out to California and met with him and played him the tape for it and everything. And what he told me was that he really loved the intro, the prologue, that comes right before Necropolis. He loved that. He thought it sounded great. And he said, but the rest of the album sucks. I just don't really like it at all. I don't care for it at all. And he said, but I tell you what, if you just don't even worry about this album and go back home, write an album and record an album that's pretty much just Flaming Metal Systems all the way through the album, and I'll sign you right now if you promise to do that. And I basically told him no way, no, that it felt like selling out to me at the moment. I probably would have been better off if I would have done it, as far as economically, and it probably would have maybe even gotten us more popular quicker. But for some reason at the time, I just felt like it was
You stuck to your guns.
wasn't the right move. So I told him no, and I went back home. And part of it was we had already finished this, and I was like, no, we've got this. This is the one. I'm proud of this. I want it to be released. And so I couldn't think of just even not releasing this album, because it was finally we had come up with an album and a recording that I thought sounded a lot like us live. And so we went ahead and put it out ourselves, and I'm glad we did. I mean, in the long run, it turned out great.
It paid off. People still love the record. It's a classic.
Our most popular, most classic album ever. And it sort of set the stage for what was to come for all the years to come after that.
I mean, your instincts were correct.
Let's hope so. Anyway, this was 1983. And then I always thought that this was released in 84. It says 85 on it. And I remember it was released like in November or December of 84 in Europe. But the label put 1985 on it because they wanted it to look like a new release that'd be talked about all year in 1985. Anyway, this was really important. Rick Fisher was the drummer on the first 3 albums. And he decided we were trying to get a little too heavy for his taste at that point, and so he passed the drumsticks over to Randy Fox, who this was his first album with us. And this was when we were starting to try and head for a lot heavier sound, a little faster as well. And this turned out to be a really great release for us too. We finally got signed by a European label, had good distribution for this, and it sold extremely well. It sold better than Crystal Logic had.
Yeah, I saw a lot of ads back then in the European magazines, Metal Forces and whatnot. It was widely.
This did tens of thousands of copies just in the first month of release over there, and so it was really important, and it sort of gave us our start, and that was great. And then right after that, in 1986, we put out The Deluge, still on Black Dragon Records at that point, and everything was going really well. This album was highly promoted, was received really well in the press by everybody in France and most of Middle Europe, although the English magazines still hated us. They thought we were satanic dirge and ugliest band in rock and roll. We kept on hearing things like that.
So British.
and the German trades didn't even really like us that much back then, but they changed their mind years later. And but this was, in my mind, The Deluge is, out of the first run of albums that we did, this was the first one that I was just proud of every single aspect of. Love the performance, love the songs, love the artwork. Eric Larnoy, who's dead now, did both Open the Gates and The Deluge. But we sold a lot of albums on this too when it came out, and we were pretty much riding the whirlwind. We were really happy. Everything was going fine for us. And then we did this album, and this is Mystification. Half of the album is Edgar Allan Poe short stories and poems that are transcended into music, or my interpretation of them musically and lyrically. And we did this one, and we were still on that road of getting heavier and faster, and even approaching some almost thrash metal type stuff with songs like Up from the Crypt and Mask of the Red Death on here. And but Black Dragon sort of started hitting a hard time over there in France, the label we were signed to. And they lost their distribution in the States. Their distributor that they were using in Europe got shut down by the French government. And the next thing you knew, they had no distribution and no
That's
clout.
pretty serious when the government shuts you down.
Yeah, well, I think it was like some illegal things they had done in business trade things or whatever.
You got caught in the crossfire of this.
Yeah, it was New Rose Distribution, I think was the name of it. And anyway, we got caught in the crossfire of all that. In the meantime, the label had lost their distribution in the States because they pissed Important Records off, and so Important Records wouldn't even have anything to do with us after that, and which was really tough, because it's like, hey, just because we're a Black Dragon, we were on Black Dragon Records, didn't mean you have to blackball us. But anyway, so this album didn't sell very well at all. It almost went virtually unnoticed when it came out, and This year is the 30th anniversary of this album, by the way. And what's really weird is that nowadays, this album is considered one of the 4 that's in the supposed heyday golden years of Manilla Road, because they say it's it used to be Crystallogic, Open the Gates, and Deluge. Well, in the last couple of years, this one's been added on to that list. And so now it's Crystallogic, Open the Gates, Deluge, and Mystification are the iconic years of Manilla Road. And so I'm thinking, well, wait another couple of years, and then they're going to start throwing Courts of Chaos and Out of the Abyss in there too.
I'm trying to think like all of them will get that treatment down the line.
Well, I hope so. That'd be great if they do, because when this one got remixed and remastered and put out as a reissue on Sentinel Steel Records, and they were cool because that's what this is from, is the Sentinel Steel release. And the Hildebrandt brothers, who did the first Star Wars poster, did the second cover for it. And which is really cool. I actually came up with that design, and this was one they came up with themselves. But I love this artwork and everything. And Sentinel Steel was really smart. They had a new cover, but they had it so that you could flip it
whichever you like
in your jewel case and have whichever one you liked the best on there. So I thought that was really neat.
Good thinking.
And it sold better for him than any other album he ever had on his
That's
label.
where I got it.
and what's funny is that, he had lots of really great bands that were putting out brand new products. This was a reissue, and it outsold every new band product that he had.
Hey,
so
quality speaks for itself.
I'm just really happy. This is a Manilla Road Live Roadkill. This one was recorded at 2 or 3 different shows in Kansas, mostly in Wichita. And really interesting because you can tell how high energy our performances were live. You listen to any song on this, and it's a lot faster than any of the songs are on the albums. And that's how Randy played. He was just so bombastic, and you can hear how much he just bashed the hell out of his drum set all the time. But that's basically the only real live album that we put out. Although we had After Midnight Live that came out. It was actually recorded live in a radio station, but it was in a studio, but it was still a live performance that was aired on the radio at the time we were playing it. And that one came out, many years later after we found some of the old tapes. But for the most part, this is our only really live album that we've ever put out. For now. I'm sure there'll be another one. And then let's see, we had Out of the Abyss next, which was probably, a lot of people considered it a thrash album. I don't really consider it that. There were several songs on it that were sort of thrashy, but half of the album's still really artistic, and you've got songs like Return of the Old Ones, Helicon, War in Heaven. These really aren't thrash songs at all. They're like heavy rock songs. But anyway, this was the album. We recorded it in Wichita, or in Newton again, suburb of Wichita, just north of Wichita. And then we went and mixed it out in Cotati, California at Prairie Sun Studios with Steve Fontana, who had also worked with a lot of other bands like Vicious Rumors, The Rods, and stuff like that. And we were still on that train of trying to get heavier and faster, and it was sort of like a contest between Randy and I, who can play the heaviest and the fastest between the drums and the guitar. But that was, this one we actually were signed to Leviathan Records, which is David Chastain's label. Well, he was in Ohio at the time. I think he still is, maybe. But anyway, things were going pretty good for us. It seemed like we were resurging a little bit at the moment. I remember it sold about, I can't remember, maybe 20,000 copies when it was released or something like that, which was really pretty good considering that Mystification had done nothing for us at the time. And but it's weird because even though it did really well for us for the most part when it first came out, it sort of capped right then. It did okay at first and then it sort of stopped. And it never did seem to catch on as being one of people's favorite albums. But the thing is nowadays, once again, I start hearing people telling me more and more how, oh, I love
There's a revival.
Yeah, you know. So anyway, I guess that'll be the next one to be one of our classic releases. And then we did The Courts of Chaos. And this was actually the last album that we did with the second lineup with Randy Fox and Scott Park and I. And the artwork on this and the Out of the Abyss was done by Aaron Brown. And Aaron Brown was the drummer for my Circus Maximus group that I started after this.
Coming up.
And anyway, this was an interesting album because Randy, our drummer, actually programmed all the drums into a drum computer, and then we sampled his drums. He programmed the music into it, you know, all the drum beats, and then that's what we played to, basically. And it was, you know, technology trying to take over. And that's the last time I ever even wanted to mess with triggers or sampled drums or anything.
Now, initially this came out under your name, and I have a cassette to prove.
Actually this came out first.
Yeah, really? Okay.
And then this,
And
the
then-
reason this came out under my name, remember a while ago I told you that Important Records got mad at Black Dragon, and they blackballed Black Dragon, plus we were blackballed in that too, just because we were a band on Black Dragon. Well, Chastain tried to get this released as Manilla Road over here, and because he was still involved with us after the Out of the Abyss, because that was on his label. And what ended up happening was Black Dragon put it out as Manilla Road, and David got Important Records to agree to releasing it as long as it didn't say Manilla Road on it, as long as it just had my name on it. So that's
So
why,
it's a collector's item now.
yeah, so that's why this came out with only my name on it. And it really wasn't supposed to be that way. It was just the only way we could get it out in the States and get distribution on it. So, and then that was, like I said, some things happened with us personally in the band where it was obvious it was time for us to hang it up for a little bit. And I formed a band called Circus Maximus. Well, I got a deal with Black Dragon again for it, and at the last minute they decided that it should be a Manilla Road album because it would sell better than a band that had a
Typical record label trick.
And so it came out as, and I really didn't want it to happen that way. It really upset the other two guys in the band, and we never did another project. And that was partly part of the reason too, was because they really wanted it to be Circus Maximus and not Manilla Road, and I did too. But it was, at the time, that was the only label we knew of to get anything released by. I couldn't get anybody in the States to buy it on me because most of them were tied into Important Records. And so, you know, we released this, and everybody scratched their heads and what the hell is this? You know, this isn't Manilla Road. But still to this day, I think it's one of my favorite albums that I've ever produced because I think my guitar work on this is extremely excellent. I think the writing's really good. It's obviously not really Manilla Road sounding writing, but it wasn't supposed to be. And the musicians I played with on this, Andy Koss and Aaron Brown, were extremely talented.
So it's a record that got tagged, literally.
And they actually helped teach me a lot of stuff. They helped me. They were so good and adept at vocal harmonies that they really helped me, even though I was an educated vocalist anyway. They helped me come up with more ideas and more approaches for harmony vocals that I used later on too in the career. Well then, most people think that Manilla Road wasn't together for like about almost 9 years, but the truth was during Circus Maximus was only about 2.5, 3 years that band was together and we were playing live. And it was soon after that, as soon as Circus broke up, I turned around and got back together with Randy Fox and Brian Patrick's brother, Harvey Patrick, who was bass player. And we did a bunch of shows for a couple of years, several years actually, as Manilla Road. but we couldn't get anybody interested in us in the label market, not even in Europe at that point. So we didn't record anything. We had written a bunch of music, but I was sort of waiting for Randy to try and put down some drum tracks on it, and it just really didn't come about because I think we were sort of in a little bit of an argument as to whether we would put real drums on it or do it like we did in Chords of Chaos.
Yes.
And I didn't want to do that. I wanted real drums again. And then the issue was, well, that's going to be expensive, you know, and all this. And so we started getting into the idea of trying to build our own recording studio. And then we got invited to do the Bang Your Head Festival in Germany in 2000. And at that point, I had been working with, we were waiting on Randy to do drum tracks forever, it seemed like. And there just wasn't any hurry because we didn't have anything going for us except doing some live shows every once in a while. And so Brian and I started working on another recording project, which we were just going to call the Shark Project. And we didn't really have a drummer. We did have a bass player that was working with us, Mark Anderson. And we were just creating the stuff using a drum machine, you know, and then we were going to find a drummer, and we were thinking, well, maybe even Randy could do that or whatever. Anyway, we got invited to do the Bang Your Head Festival in 2000. I asked Randy if he was interested in doing it, and I brought Mark Anderson into the thing saying, hey, can you do the bass work? And they were all on board and everything, so I told them, yeah, we're in. We booked the show and everything. And then a few days later, Randy decided he didn't want to do it. And that ended up being a problem between him and I for a lot of years. And I said, well, I've already booked it. I'm not going to turn it down. I think this is an opportunity that we can't afford to pass up. And so I'm going to do it no matter what. If you're not going to come along, I'm going to have to get another drummer. And he got really upset at me for that. And so anyway, we ended up parting company for many years, not even talking to each other for a long time. That's all since been settled. We're really good friends, and he plays with us still again now, every once in a while. So it's all good. But anyway, after that, I ended up doing the Bang Your Head with another drummer, Mark Anderson. When we got back, we got another drummer to do the album with, which is Scott Peters, friend of Mark Anderson. And this was originally going to be the Shark Project. But instead, we decided, okay, well, it does sound, we were handing out demo tapes of this all over the place when we were in Europe. And I got lots of offers for it, but everybody wanted it to be Manilla Road. And I was okay with that at that point because this sounded enough like Manilla Road. I didn't care, you know. It's like, okay, well, this can pass as a Manilla Road album. Circus Maximus didn't sound anything like a Manilla Road
And that
album,
passed.
you know. So this I'm really proud of. It's a huge concept that I came up with that ties into Nordic gods, Greek gods, Cthulhu mythos, and, you know, the race of mankind here on Midgard. And it's a huge concept. I don't know how I came up with it, except that I smoke a lot of marijuana, so that's probably how it came up. I don't really drink much anymore, so I guess I got to blame the weed.
Whatever works.
Right. No, I'm an avid reader. I study history, mythology, archaeology, anthropology, all that stuff. It's just right up my boat, right up my lake, or whatever, my river. But anyway, really proud of this. It was our first attempt at recording ourselves in our own little studio. So doesn't necessarily production-wise sound as great as some of the other releases, but still very happy with it because it was our first effort in our own studio, and it actually came out pretty good, you know. So I'm very proud of that one. And same lineup: Mark Anderson, Scott Peters on drums, Mark Anderson on bass, myself on guitar and vocals, and then of course during this time, this is when Brian Patrick started singing with us too. And he didn't sing a whole lot on Atlantis Rising, but he started singing a lot more on this one, Spiral Castle. And everything from Atlantis Rising on, we sort of call the Reformation period. And this one, it's sort of funny, you know. I love the artwork on Atlantis Rising, but I had a little something to do with that one. I didn't have anything to do with the artwork design on this, and there's orcs on the cover, and there's no orcs in the stories on the album whatsoever. So I have no idea what's going on with the orcs there, but I guess it just looks cool. But anyway, this was an album that about half of the songs were songs that were actually written during that time that I was talking about before, when Harvey Patrick was playing with me and Randy, and we were writing stuff but not recording because we didn't have a contract. And so about half the songs were actually written back in that day and then finally put down and recorded at this point. And strangely enough, that album was even in the Rolling Stone charts for a week or two, way back when. Not when it first got released, but years after it got released.
Wow.
And all of a sudden it showed up in one of the sales
Patience
charts.
pays off.
It was one of the sales charts from up in the North Midwest, like around Michigan or something like that. I don't know where it was, but I was like, what? You know? And so really strange, but one of those things where it happens, it gets a little more popular later on in life instead of right when it's born.
And you've been having a lot of that.
Yeah, it seems like
something you should
yeah,
be
it's
used to by
like,
now.
you know, I don't know. Maybe I'm ahead of my time now. I feel like I'm way behind my time though. But anyway, this is I was talking about Dreams of Eschaton earlier, and Dreams of Eschaton was the original title for this. But there's actually 3 extra songs on this too that weren't on the original album, which is Time Trap, Venusian Sea, and Aftershock. Those were actually a demo that we recorded after we recorded the album. And I think when we were sending out demo tapes, we sent out cassettes that had all of the Dreams of Eschaton on it, plus those 3 demo songs. And eventually, I think everybody started just calling it the Mark of the Beast demo, because it had the song Mark of the Beast on it. It seemed like that was one of the most popular songs off of it as a demo. And the guys at Monster Records bugged me for 10 years trying to get me to agree to release this. I told them no, year after year after year.
He was consistent.
Until about 10 years later, and I finally said, look, Dennis, you guys have bugged me consistently year after year to put this out. You know, stop calling me, just let's do it. Let's go ahead and do it, because you've been so adamant about it. I got to give you a thumbs up for just being determined. And so we went ahead and put it out, and lo and behold, it became a really popular thing for us.
So he was right all along.
Yeah, they were right on.
Yeah.
So
Back to reality now.
yeah, that came out, and then back to the real world of Manilla Road. We got a new drummer, Corey Christner, who was son of another guitar player friend of mine in Wichita. And we did Gates of Fire, and I actually thought of the concept for this while we were on tour in Europe, and it was when I was in Greece. And I came up with this idea of doing an album that was three concepts, like a trilogy of trilogies is what we called it. And so you've got 3 different concepts that are within the whole album, and everything was based around the number 3. 3 concepts, 3 songs in each concept. And I even went as far to be metaphoric in my approach to it, where there's almost always 3 verses in every song. And I kept the 3 going as much as I could in that. But I love this. One of the concepts is about the fall of Troy, or Ilium, based on Virgil's writings instead of Homer, like everybody always bases it on Virgil was a Roman poet that told the same story, but not the same exact way, more from a Roman and a Greek Roman point of view than a Greek point of view. And so there was that. Also I'm a huge fan of Robert E. Howard, creator of Conan, Solomon Kane, lots of other cool stuff. And we did a Conan thing from the Frost Giant's Daughter story. And so that was one of the other concepts. And then we also did the stand of Leonidas and the 300 Spartans and their cohorts at the Battle of Thermopylae. And so we had these three huge concepts, very historical, very fantasy oriented at the same time, and definitely ancient stuff, you know. What I would call one of our most epic albums. I was starting to get really good at using the new studio equipment that we had, and I'm very, very proud of that. Then Brian took a bit of a break from the band. He had some issues with his domestic situation at that point, and he took a little time off. So we all of a sudden ended up being a three-piece again. And I forgot to mention that along with the new drummer, we had a different bass player as well, and that was Brian's brother Harvey. Once again, ended up playing with us. And so I had Corey and Harvey and Brian and I on Gates of Fire, and then Brian had to bail out for a while, and it was just me and Harvey and Corey on this. And for some reason, without Brian on board, I really almost went into like a death metal phase almost. And this album is in parts extremely brutal and heavy for Manilla Road. And yet there's still some fine epic material on here too, like the song, the title cut Voyager, or maybe Tree of Life, things like that, you know, are really good songs. But this is another huge sprawling concept where it's about a bunch of Vikings that are running from Christianity and end up in the New World and end up finding the Indians of Central America and everything, and the Vikings are mistaken for their god Quetzalcoatl. So it's pretty, I don't know, I love Viking stuff. You know.
Same here.
Been asked a lot, you know, you write a lot about Vikings. Why is that? All I can say is, well, they're fucking cool.
That's all it takes.
So that, anyway, then Brian came back on board, sort of resolved his domestic issues, and
Which always helps.
yes, and came back, and we did Playground of the Damned. Corey was still with us on this, but Harvey had gone by then, and we had just brought in a bass player, Vince Goldman. And he did some touring with us, and everything was going fine. And then he developed what they call Meniere's disease, which is a problem with your inner ear and your eardrum, and it messes with your equilibrium. And the thing that messes with you the most is loud noises. What a terrible thing to have
to be in a
for
band.
heavy metal musician. And so he basically had to hang it up. He couldn't tour with us. And he knew that if he couldn't tour with us, he couldn't really be on the albums, you know. And so after doing 2 songs on this recording, he was honest with us and told us what was going on and said, man, I gotta bail. I'm sorry, I don't want to, but I don't have a choice. And we're still really great friends. Just talked to him the other day before we took off on tour. He called me up and said, man, best of luck to you and all this. So, you know, I love the guy to death, and I really wish it would have never happened to him. It's a sad situation, but he's doing okay. And he's a happy guy, and he's got a good life going for himself. And he still plays. He just has to do it really quietly, and he can't do it with us, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
But he played on 2 songs, Art of War and maybe Brethren of the Hammer, I think, was the other one. And then the rest of them, we had E.C. Hellwell come in and do those. But this was one where things were really difficult during making this album because of dealing with switching bass players in the middle of it. Things were just going sort of bizarre at the time, so it turned out to be a really dark album. And I think that was probably because we were going through a lot of dark times. Corey was having some problems in his personal life at that point, and that ended up being the last album that Corey did with us. And so had to bring in some new people again.
As always.
You know.
New reinforcements.
Ended up getting a friend of Corey's, Josh Castillo, to play bass with us. And we ended up getting Noity to play drums from Germany, and who had been a long-time fan, and maybe people don't realize, but he actually made the very first Manilla Road website and ran it for us.
That's some trivia.
Yeah, ran it for us for an awful long time and did a great job on it. And we became friends through the internet. I met him in 2000 in Germany. We became fast friends then, and he had done this tribute to Randy Fox drum solo thing that he had sent us and everything, and it was great. And when I ended up with a situation where Corey wasn't going to be able to tour anymore, and we'd already booked some shows, one of them was the Hammer of Doom for 2011, I was like, well, my goodness, we're just going to have to cancel that, I guess, because I don't have a drummer. That's when Ollie, the promoter for that festival, told me, well, Noity knows all of your songs. Why don't you just ask him? And I was like, oh, wow, he is a really great drummer, isn't he? And so I asked him, and yeah, he was on board like that. And then after we did the Hammer of Doom, he did so well, it was like, Brian and I decided, Brian was like, you've got to ask him to come on and be our drummer. I said, all right, I'll get to it. We'll see how he feels about this. And before I could even talk to him about anything, he grabbed me by the collar outside after the show, and he said, Shark, I've never said this to anybody, but please let me be the drummer in Manilla Road. And so he made my life just really easy. And I was like all coy about it, too. I was like, oh, well, let me think about it.
Yes.
And it's like, of course, I was actually going to ask you if you would join. He's like, really? And like, yes. He's like, oh. Anyway, this was the first album we did with Noity and Josh. And I think he played on once. I think he played on the title cut because he was still working with me before Josh took over and everything. And we did this one, and this is an important album for me because the title cut, Mysterium, is actually about my great uncle. His name was Ludwig von Leichhardt, and he was a famous explorer in Australia who, on their last expedition to circumnavigate the continent and map everything out, they all disappeared, and still to this day nobody really knows what happened to them. So anyway, that song's about my great uncle.
And the mystery.
And this was an interesting album because we actually didn't mix this one ourselves. We turned it over to another engineer at another studio in Wichita to mix, always trying to get better, And I learned a lot of stuff from him because I learned how to record in more studios in the analog world. And all of a sudden here we're in a total digital world. And I was a little dumbfounded by some of the technology, and it took me a little while to get used to it all. And Steve Falke at Cornerstone was really helpful. He let me work with him all the time, just watching what he was doing, and he'd explain everything to me. And so this was like a learning process album of how to deal with mixing in digital. Yeah. But we also signed to Zix Music Golden Core Records at that time. And that was a really important move for us too, because they have really good distribution and still do. And they're considered one of the major labels in Germany. And so they've really helped us a lot because they've given us a lot of promotion that we didn't have going on before. Helped us become more visible in the European market and even the American market. This was the last album we put out, which is The Blessed Curse. At the time we put it out, this was my ultimate favorite album that we had ever released because I finally felt like I had made a production that was worth the band and the music. This was a really big output for us because it's actually a double CD, double album, or actually sort of a quadruple album almost. There's so much music in it. And there was a lot of acoustic stuff, a lot of spacey stuff, and then a lot of heavy stuff as well. But this was an album that was meant to show everybody that we still could do just about anything we wanted, and that we were still very artistic and not just a cut and dry rock and roll or heavy metal band. And so we got really artistic. This is probably the first time that I ever put my feelings from my shoulder out to the public, because usually I don't express political or religious beliefs that much. Well, I do hack on religion a lot, but this was definitely a hack on religion album. And but I'm really proud of this one. It's done really well for us. I think there's some just excellent production work on this compared to a lot of my other albums with Manilla Road. So I felt like we were, on our way, and things were looking up a lot with that one. And then we just finished putting this one out, To Kill a King, and it's even better than Blessed Curse production-wise, if you ask me. This one sounds an awful lot like this band does live when we're, clicking on all cylinders. I'm really proud of the songs, the performances, and we have our newest bass player on here, Josh. That was Blessed Curse was Josh's last album with us, and we've got Phil Ross playing with us now. Noidy's still on drums, Brian's still singing with me, and I'm still playing guitar and singing some, of course. I actually sang more on this album than I had for a while. Brian was usually taking most of the lead vocal parts, but on this album I did more than he did for some reason. And but we're all really happy with this. Phil Ross has been an excellent addition to the band. He just fits so well in with us performance-wise, musically. He really has a knack for knowing where I'm trying to go with what I'm trying to do. And so it was really easy to work with him. He learned like 38 songs and like almost 4 hours worth of material in about 2 months or a month, I mean, it was incredible the pace that he was working at. And not only that, but during that same time, he learned all these songs and recorded the album with us as well. And Paolo Gerardi from Italy is the guy that does the artwork on this and also the Blessed Curse. And he's a personal friend of ours. And the reason I use him so much nowadays is because he doesn't use digital anything. He's an old-time
Analog
artist. And this one and the Blessed Curse, it's all oil on canvas. No, I don't even think he does airbrush, to tell you the truth.
Beautiful.
It's all painting by hand. And there's definitely no photoshopping going on there. So I love the album. It's out now on Golden Core Records, and it's I think it's the best that we've done today, and so I think there's even better to come yet.
To conclude this, did you expect that it would last 40 years?
Always wanted it to. Wanted to do this until I die, and I still do. I'm not sure if I ever really anticipated it getting to be like it is. I was just, one of my first goals was like, I don't even care if I get rich, I just want to be able to put out albums. I just want to be able to put out maybe 10 albums. Well, now I'm, if you count our live stuff, we're up to 20 now. 18 studio albums, 2 live releases. And so I'm not sure if I really knew it was going to come to this or not, but I always had faith that it could. And I never gave up out of all those years. And I think that's the message to everybody with Manilla Road is, and I never gave up my own stance. I don't feel like I ever sold out, whatever the meaning of that is. Everybody has their own different idea of what success or selling out is, I think. To me, selling out would be not a matter of doing it just for the money, but not caring about the music anymore and only caring about the money. Making all your decisions based off of, is it going to make money? Is it going to make money? That's not what I still play and write and record what I feel like and not what I think is going to make me money. It has to sound cool to me or else I'm not thinking it sounds cool to anybody else. And I just hope that what sounds cool to me still sounds cool to everybody else.
And it does, because people love the band.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
But I always had the faith that it could turn into this. I just didn't know if it would really. I mean, there's a lot of times where you're just like, oh my God, it's just, it's useless. It's useless, and I'm just spinning my wheels. Many times I thought about quitting and hanging it up. And even now, the older I get, I mean, it's not easy to tour at my age. And especially now that we tour more and more every year. So, but I love it on the road. I love hanging out with our fans and our friends because, my goodness, they're the most gracious, respectful people that I've ever met in my life. And I mean, if I ended up just dying someplace on the road with my fans and friends, that's fine. I'm doing what I love, and I'm just so fortunate and grateful that I've got a fan base of supporters that makes it so that I'm allowed to continue to do this, because I don't have another job. I just play music, and I love it, and I don't know what else I'd do with my life right now. That's what would be the doom of
You
Shark.
found your calling.
That would be the doom of Shark, is if I couldn't do this anymore. But we've got so many people out there that are still flocking to the Manilla Road camp. I mean, our fan base is growing constantly every year, and our shows prove that. We've got younger and younger people showing up at our shows all the time. It's great to see that. That means, that metal's not a dying breed.
Far from it.
And over in Europe, it's even getting stronger and stronger still to this day. And I don't really believe in luck, but I do believe that I've been very fortunate. And I know that, I remember telling somebody at one point, yeah, I guess I've been really lucky that things have gone well for me. And they said, no, you're not lucky, you earned this. And it made me think about that, and I realized that, maybe there really isn't anything that's like luck. It's all just a matter of devotion, persistence, dedication, and belief. You got to have faith in yourself. It's like they say in sports or anything, you can't do it unless you believe you can do it. Well, I just tried to always think positive and believe that this could turn into something like it is now. And now I just feel fortunate that it did turn into something like it is now. And I sure hope it still gets better, bigger and better, because what I really in this for is to make cool music. And I think we're in the middle of doing a lot of that right now, and we've been doing it for years, 40 to be exact. And if I could, I'd do it for another 40 more, but I'm not sure. Not sure the metal gods will let me live that long.
No,
So.
perhaps you've done a lot of teams with metal gods. They might have some mercy out there.
Yeah. So, but to all our fans, thank you so much. Couldn't have done it without you. Still can't do it without you. And it's you guys' faith in us that keeps us doing it as well. So.
Thank you.
Up the hammers, down
Up
the
the
hammers.
hammers.